Hey everybody, welcome to the In All Things podcast. It's time to see God in everything. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to a new episode of the In All Things podcast. My name is Mitch Frost, and today I'm joined by Jared Hudson and Mr. Josiah Webster.
What up?
It is your second time
here
on the In All Things
first
podcast.
official time with you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we'll see where this goes.
I mean, Steve's out, so they were like, who can we possibly grab?
Who's next?
Yeah.
Third string.
The office is getting thin.
Fourth string, yeah.
Christy
was also
Christy's
out.
too. Yeah, well, here we are. How's everybody doing this morning? It's a Monday morning for us. A bit longer day for us yesterday, Sunday.
Yeah.
Because you've been kind of helping out and trying to revamp some youth worship stuff. So
Yeah, just doing coaching, trying. They're great, but yeah, I think they need some guidance and some help, and so I've been showing up to the well and trying to be a positive influence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
doing what you can.
Yeah, pretty much.
A couple weeks ago, you almost won the game we played.
I did, yeah. I love playing youth group games because it gives me a chance to assert dominance over seventh graders, which I don't get very often. And then, inadvertently, I wound up in the final two, and I was on stage. And I looked at you and I was like, I feel like I shouldn't be able to win. We should just call it and give it to this kid. And you were like, no, do it. And he won fair and square.
Yeah, he did. He did. He was good at that game.
He was.
But it was like, I went back to the sound booth and Josiah was sitting there. And he's like, we playing a game tonight? And I was like, yeah. He's like, what are we playing? And I was like, oh, it's called Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Cup. And he was like, oh my gosh, I love that game. And then I look back and he's just like beating all these students in it and makes it to the final. So yeah, well played.
Well, I didn't know the other one that you played, the head, shoulders, knees, toes, nibbledy bubbins or whatever it's called.
Nibbity bibbles, but we'll go with what you said.
Sure, yeah. I didn't know that one.
Didn't know that one.
And I lost immediately.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
Have you played it?
Oh, yeah. I'm a world champion. I was really good one season.
Play right now.
Yeah. They flew me to Beijing for the championships.
Can't believe you lost.
What's new with you, Jared?
A
whole lot of nothing?
Really nothing, just busyness. Lots of busyness.
Mm-hmm.
Like trying to get the courtyard project wrapped up for your fifth quarter event on Friday, which is going to be sweet.
Yeah, it's coming up. It'll be good.
How many kids do you think will be there?
I don't know. I don't know what to expect because it's kind of like, we go to the football game and just start telling people that it's happening. And we advertise free food, so usually that gets people here.
Yeah.
Last time we did it, we didn't do one last year. I forget why, but the year before was the only one we ever did, and we had over 100 people here. So
should be able to
it's a good turnout.
match that pretty easily.
Yeah. And so
hot dogs, s'mores, bonfire.
Yep.
Good hang.
Yep. So
it'll be good.
It's a nice, fun thing. You can literally walk to it after the football game, so I'm hoping it's a good turnout. But yeah, the courtyard's gonna be sweet. We're gonna break in our new fire pit.
Yep. If anybody has any firewood they want to drop off at the church,
just drop it off.
Between Thursday morning when this airs and
Friday
night, we'll take it off your hands.
Come by and just put it in the fire pit.
Yeah.
Just drop it off
or in Mitch's office.
Or in my office.
Just stack it.
Yeah, cool. Well,
there's a pallet to be burned
in the garage.
That'll be good.
But that'll light up like super fast.
Yeah, and then it'll burn fast too.
Yeah, and then get it started at least.
I want to do like a big bonfire to break in this fire pit.
Yeah.
That'd be sweet.
Get the fire department over here and
singe the grass
surrounding
it.
Yes.
Well, today with the three of us, there are 6 full-time staff here at Sycamore, and
Sycamore 6.
We are on the younger half. So, wait, no.
Yeah, no, it's 6.
That's true.
Are we on the younger half?
There are.
Because Jared's old?
Yeah, that's true. No, that's true.
Yeah, then there's 6.
Yeah.
Our group text is called the Sycamore 6.
Yeah. Okay. So we're on the younger half.
Full-time.
Well,
yeah.
Everybody's full-time in ministry in my book.
That's true, yeah. So I thought it would be interesting if the three of us took some time, and mainly you two, because this is the only full-time ministry job that I've ever had. I thought it'd be interesting if you guys talked about times where you, being younger on staff, were in a position where you had to lead up or lead when you weren't in charge. and what that can be like, because I know not just in ministry, but in any position, there can be times where you count yourself out because of your age, or you're in a position where you're like, okay, I'm not in charge. I don't have that maybe role or that title, but I feel like there's things I can do to change the organization or change. And so I don't know if you guys have any experience with that, internships or actual jobs of times where you've just kind of felt like, man, I'm the youngest one around, and I'm still want to lead well and maybe even show people that age doesn't isn't the only thing kind of thing. So I don't know, whoever wants to jump in. I just thought the three of us being on the younger side of this staff could be an interesting conversation for us to have, but
For sure.
we can go somewhere completely different. That was just my only thought.
No, I like it. Yeah, Jared, since you're the oldest, why don't you go first?
Oh man, I feel like I have a lot to say on this topic, but
Same.
I don't know. I'll say this: the worst thing you can do in leadership as a younger person is just ignore the fact that you're the youngest. In my opinion, ignore the fact that you're the youngest and just pretend like you are a seasoned veteran and everybody should respect you. I think there's more power in playing into your age and being able and willing to ask questions, and of those that are even, technically like under your leadership, being willing to listen to them, because it's just awkward if you step into a position as like a full-time ministry position at 21 and all of your team is in their 40s and 50s and you just pretend to be one of them. Like it's weird, because I've been there, and it feels awkward and looks awkward from all parties involved. But I just think being willing to ask questions, and being willing to learn and being able to be vulnerable with people, I think that's kind of where you start, in my opinion. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that, but I've been in this. So this is like this is my third church that I've worked in a leadership ministry capacity, and so I took some of that advice from other people that fed into me about my age when I was younger. And when I was hired here, I was 21. I think I had just turned 21, which is kind of crazy. And there were some issues and some conflicts, like with some people early on, that kind of resolved because their ideal candidate, when Steve was searching for a worship leader, was not a 21-year-old, because they were all like, "Yeah, we need, we're going to bring in somebody who can lead us and who can be like our best friend and relate to us in every life scenario and hang out with us all the time." And then Steve brings in 21-year-old, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, we have nothing in common with this guy. Like, he has no leadership capacity." So I think in that framework, it also works on the other hand too. Like the people on the team need to be willing to accept and listen to somebody who has been put in leadership over them for one reason or the other. So it goes both ways, and that's where it gets tough, because not everybody's willing to work that way with somebody younger than them. Like, so what do you think?
Well, I started in full-time ministry when I was 19, and was the youngest person on staff for 6 straight years. And for me, it was I agree with everything you said. Own the fact that you're young, own your age, and learn, because you don't know what you're doing. And that's okay, by the way. Most people don't know what they're doing. Even if you've been in it for 50 years and you know how to do your job really well, times change and things come up, and ultimately we're all just doing our absolute best, trying really hard, and you draw on wisdom of past experiences, but in the moment you're all kind of looking at each other going, this is the right move, right guys? And that's why it kind of takes a team. But I had that 1 Timothy verse over my desk for years, the one that says, let no one look down on me due to my age, but let me be an example of. And so that was my mantra. I was like, I'm aware I'm young, and therefore I know that I have probably a magnifying glass on me. People are looking to see what I'm going to do and how I'm going to live. And so, look, people mess up and that happens, but I was just very aware and conscious of the fact that, you know, in a lot of scenarios, I'm the dumbest person in the room, and that's okay.
In all scenarios.
In every single scenario, I was always the dumbest person in the room.
Was?
But you know, you learn, and after a while, you notice a shift. I think trust in general on staff is built, and that's kind of true regardless of age. And you know, after a couple of years, I was noticing that people were taking my suggestions more seriously and actually looking at them. And you know, that's kind of gratifying as a I guess I would have been 21 at that point, year old, kind of going, oh, like these people who have been doing it for forever, they actually are like listening to what I'm saying and taking it into consideration, and it made me feel more like part of the leadership team as opposed to just the guy who does the worship stuff you know, on Sunday mornings. But yeah, I've got a lot to say about this topic. I also feel like there's been a weird lull in a church staffing where like my dad, when he joined ministry, was 18. And like, I feel like I meet so many pastors who are like, I got into it when I was 22, you know? And then when I came aboard, it was kind of, there's this weird lull where it was like, I was the youngest for forever, and I was the youngest in like any circles that I could find, and like by a lot, like most of them were in their 30s. And I think there's this kind of weird perception that you experienced when you were hired where people want, you know, the experience, and they want somebody who's established already, and it kind of sucks for, you know, college kids trying to get into ministry and do what they feel like God's called them to do. I feel like that's kind of going away now. I'm seeing more and more young people come into ministry and following their calling, but I feel like there was definitely kind of a weird gap, and I think we're seeing that play out in a lot of churches right now where, you know, their staff is aging up, and there's a huge gap between new hires versus people who have been there, and there's no kind of intermediary, you know, upper 20, young 30 class in a lot of churches. A lot of them are like upper 40s, and then their new hires are like 19, which is weird because I feel like we're called to train up the next generation. And even me, you know, I still think I'm fairly young. I'm 28. I feel like it's my responsibility to find the next 21-year-old and go, let's train you up just like somebody did for me. At some point, somebody has to take a chance on you and go, yeah, this 21-year-old may not know what they're doing, but like neither did I. So let's see what God might have for them. I don't know. Yeah.
I do think the pendulum is swinging to where there's more and more churches who are willing to take the risk to hire young now. I feel like I've seen that a lot with my friends and people I went to college with. And even like, shout out Mark Phillips at the church he's at. He's been talking recently about, you know, looking for the positions that they need to hire in. And he's like, I'm setting kind of like a ceiling on the age. Like I want to take a chance on someone young.
Because they'll accept no money to come.
There's always that. But I think that's starting to happen more and more of like, you know, okay, we're going to bring you in, give you leadership. And if it goes terribly, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Right.
But let's take a chance on younger people and see how it goes, which I think is important. I think it's really good that that's, you know, starting to happen more and more in the church world. But
it's healthy.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's a different perspective, and I think it can help a lot of churches maybe do things differently that they didn't even know they needed to do, you know?
Well, and I think, you know, everybody wants the next, you know, their next hire to be a level up and, oh, this is going to get us, you know, what we didn't have before and all this. But the truth is, like, when you make a young hire, like, it is truly a gamble. And you're like, yeah, I hope it's going to level up, but it could suck for the next 2 years until they kind of figure out the ropes, you know? It's just tough.
I think it's an interesting situation for you when you got hired here, because you almost like the opposite side of this spectrum, because as a student pastor, it's like you want a student pastor who is young enough to relate to students. And when you first started here, you were just like a couple years out of high school.
Yeah.
And so I bet it was just different for you, because on one side, it's like, yeah, he's relatable to high schoolers, but then on the other side of the coin, it's like, oh yeah, he's really young, and his parents are probably like
just barely not a high schooler.
Like what does this guy have? You know, what kind of qualifications does this guy have to be speaking and teaching and pouring into the lives of students only a couple years older than them? And you know, you've kind of graduated above that now, because once you have a family and a wife and a kid, like everybody's view on you is it suddenly becomes a little bit different just because of those qualifications. It's like, yes, he has, parenting. He has, like, he's not just a irresponsible high school graduate, like. So I bet for you probably felt that pull in both directions. Like, yeah, you're young, but also, like, I'm supposed to be young. I'm a student pastor.
Yeah, it was a unique situation to step into. I came on part-time when I was 20, went full-time at 21. And, I feel like I came in with a bit of a chip on my shoulder. Yeah. And I kind of was like, okay, I'm hearing the things being said. I think that's another thing, too, that I had to kind of work through was because I've grown up here, because my family is involved in our church, people didn't really try to hide the things that they were saying about, me potentially stepping into this position. So, like, I heard a lot, anything from, I was this guy's leader a couple years ago, there's no way, to, he's not even old enough to rent a church van. Like, I heard all kinds of stuff.
You can't, you just have to pay a fee.
And so, I feel like I just kind of came in and I really leaned into people that I trusted. I really leaned into, the elders here at our church, and I wanted to go before them and make sure that they all kind of felt peace about this decision. I trusted you guys a lot that were here, you and Christy, and that kind of got on board with it. And I kind of just went from there, and I, was just like, all right, I'm just going to lead strong and lead how I feel like I'm called to lead. And eventually, hopefully those voices go away. And thankfully they did. But if being honest, like, it was a tough situation to step into. And if I didn't feel strongly called to it, just the constant barrage of, being the young, inexperienced guy was hard for, the first couple months of being on staff, because I was like, man, it's hard not to get in your head and be like, oh, maybe they're right. Like, maybe this is just like, maybe I don't deserve this. Maybe this isn't what I should be doing. But I kind of just would go back to this place of like, all right, there's something about this. I feel called to this. I feel peace when I, am leading this student ministry. And I felt like I was in a unique position, like you said, of like, yeah, I was younger, but that actually gave me kind of an upper hand because I was in the same culture and experiencing the same things that the students were. So I was like, I'm just going to lean into that and go all in, and we'll just see what happens. And, praise God, it worked, I guess. But, that's kind of why I wanted to hear your guys' perspectives on this whole conversation too, because I've had my, bit of experience of, plenty of comments and things said, and just kind of like, all right, God, I'm just going to trust you through it all. It can get in your head for sure.
Do you feel like the church as a whole right now needs fresh, young blood with new ideas, or should we be more leaning into, those who have gone before us and their age and their wisdom? Like, what is the big, because, as time goes on, and as our needs and our problems fluctuate, the answer is always different. So what would you say we are right now, like as a society here in the U.S. and our culture? What's more valuable, churches with older, aged, experienced wisdom, or fresh new ideas?
I think it's a really good question. My personal response to it would be, I think right now, maybe more than ever, I think you need both, which sounds like an easy answer, but I think you need the innovation and the hunger that younger, fresh blood is bringing, because there's something about Gen Z and what's happening that I never saw in my generation, never saw when I was in high school, anything like that. So I think you need that, and at the same time, having leaders and elders and people that are pretty strong in their convictions and traditions, and I think the marrying of the two is so important. You need a church staff who's able to stand firm on, hey, this is the truth's not going to change. Here's where we are, but at the same time being willing and open to the young blood and the fresh blood of saying, yeah, but we could do it this way or this avenue, or when you communicate it like this, it actually triggers this, and being able to talk through some of those different approaches. I think the marrying of those two is, in my opinion, like the healthiest, church things happening I see are because they have both of those dynamics that are willing to give and take on push back on each other, and willing to say like, okay, yeah, we can innovate, we can do this, but we're going to keep this because this is really foundational. And then, the younger person's able to say, yeah, I completely respect the tradition and the way that things have always been done. I think that would be really great, but let's innovate this small detail or this look or this feel to it. And I think when those two things come together, also who you're reaching is you would reach both at the same time. So I don't know. I think it's that, and I think that's a really cool thing that's happening too, because the outside world want to say like, oh, Gen Z, they just don't want to listen to authority. They just don't want to listen to people above them. And it's like, well, they do if they feel like they have a voice and they're respected and allowed and trusted to innovate and create and do things differently. But with kind of like the authority figure of somebody who's like, I've been there to some degree. Let me, maybe tweak some of these things to make it better and make sure you're not going to, fail. But I think that kind of marrying of the two, and in my opinion, I think that's when it goes best.
Josiah, do you think that, just to let you talk a little bit, but
Sure.
I'm also genuinely curious about your opinion on this. Do you think that like the infiltration of like postmodern theology that we're facing now, and is that a result of older church leadership trusting and being too open to just bring on the youngest people just because they're young, or are we in an era where we should be maybe leaning into more established full-time ministers and things like that, just because we need to be protecting, the gospel message and its theology and whole. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've got nothing against postmodern worldview. I grew up in nothing but postmodernity, and in many ways, I would say my own worldview is super postmodern. To not talk in code, for those of you guys listening.
I was just about to say the same thing. Yeah. Let's break it down and dumb it down.
Postmodern worldview basically states that you have your truth and I have my truth, and they're both equally valid, and that's okay because your experience is true, and my experience, though it's different, is also true, which at its core isn't a bad thing. I experience the world slightly differently than you do, than you do. And it doesn't mean that either of those experiences are wrong or they didn't happen. It's just different experiences. Full postmodernity then takes that all the way to truth as an absolute and goes, well, there is no absolute truth because your truth is just as true as my truth is, which is kind of where it veers off of out of left field. But I think the core of postmodern thinking is true, and I think actually is important in church life, because ultimately, especially when you're talking about something like salvation, like nobody can give your life to God other than you, and you're not going to be saved because your parents took you to church as a kid, and then that being through osmosis somehow you got the Holy Spirit. That's not how it works. It's a very personal faith. And in that sense, I think postmodernity actually helps a lot, because it helps kind of break down some of the barriers of cultural Christianity that, our generation certainly struggled with. Well, I've always been going to church, and it doesn't really mean anything to them. In terms of church leadership, I think to echo what Mitch said, you need both. I think you need humble young people who are happy to learn from the more established staff and ministers and people who have been in it and just have seen more, who don't think too highly of themselves. The young people don't think too highly of themselves, understand that there's value in listening to arguments that maybe they don't even agree with. But I think you also need established leaders who are happy to hold the reins with a very loose grip and go, play with it. I think it's so easy to get stuck into your comfort zone. Even at my age, I get sucked into a comfort zone of like planning worship set lists where I'm like, oh, it's got to be this way because this is how it goes 90% of the time. And it drives me away from innovating. I have to pull myself out of that personally. And I think with fresh blood, if you explain why you do something a certain way, then they can go, oh, I see the kernel of value there. Let's keep that, and let's take it in a different direction and try something new because it could be impactful and different. I think that's where you get good innovation. I think good innovation isn't just doing something cool and different for the sake of doing something cool and different. I think it's keeping what's valuable and building upon it in a way that hasn't been done before. And I think the church really needs that. I mean, you know, I think we don't struggle with that too crazy bad here at Sycamore, but you know, I've been to a lot of churches in the past few years, and I just see a lot of churches that are stuck in ruts and then don't understand why you know, their people aren't passionate about sharing their faith. And it's like, well, yeah, man, like, you're bored with your faith. Why are you expecting them not to be bored with it, you know? So yeah, I think it's incredibly valuable to get young people, like you said, who are feeding off of the experience of others and then flipping it into something new.
I like the way you put it, though. Humble young leaders, but willing to push in the right way, right? Because there is value in doing things different sometimes. There is value in changing things up. But I love the idea and the perspective of like humbly, you know, realizing, okay, maybe I'm new on staff, maybe I'm new in this job, I am younger by a good gap, so I'm going to respect the tradition and respect what's been in place, but also not just, you know, do something the way it's always been done because that's always how it's been done, right? Younger people aren't wired that way anymore. It's like, no, I'm going to push, I'm going to innovate. But I think doing it in the right way and the right approach is super important. So I think that's super good.
I think my question was more geared towards
like,
no, it's fine. No, it was a great, no, it was great. I liked your answer. It was it was great for this topic. So like, to expound on it more, I think in regards to theology, as a whole, and how postmodernism has created this new postmodern theology, which basically misinterprets Scripture as a whole and allows us to adapt it and change it to however we want to use it in our lives. So, you know, because at the core of Bible interpretation and hermeneutics are two basic principles. One, what does the Scripture say? What did the original author mean?
What was it intended for?
And how can I take that and apply it to my life? So those two rules are what we should always be using when we're trying to interpret Scripture. But we flipped it, and we flipped the order of it to how can I take this Scripture and apply it to my life? And we take the first rule, which is what did the original author mean? And we just ignore it basically. So, and I think a lot of this is due to, and not saying that, you know, the older generation has no responsibility here, but as we bring in and infiltrate the church ministry world with younger, inexperienced blood who is bringing all of these ideas, these great, some of them great, amazing ideas on how to advance the gospel, but where we lack the experience. And they are young people are so easily moldable and influenced by culture around them. So we're taking that ease of influence and allowing it to change our interpretation of Scripture and influence the church. So what I'm getting at here is I feel like we put too much of an emphasis on hiring young people, and we get really dangerous with our gospel message and our theological journey, and being just the ability to explain simple doctrines to our church and our people. I think that the fine balance of having a wide variety of ages in the ministry spectrum is important, because those that have been there for a long time are going to be holding on to those deep biblical theological truths and teaching them to the young people who are moldable and easily influenced by the postmodern worldview and thinking. So I just think being careful, bringing on the right people when they're young, you know, because there's so many people that want to jump into ministry at age 19 and be like, I have all the answers, listen to me. But if the older crowd is like, okay, let's listen to all the 19-year-olds, that gets tricky. So
what's that? Your actual question was, what does that balance look like?
It does. You don't have to answer that question. That's just kind of my. Yeah, go ahead. What are your thoughts?
So I think when I first came on church staff, not here, but my church in Chicago, because I was also very easily influenced, and I was I was given book assignments, basically read these people.
Who were they?
Oh man, all over the place.
Okay.
So Spurgeon, Chesterton, Lewis, all the way back to starts with a T. Tozer, Luther, like tons and tons and tons.
Were you reading in German?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I mean, you are fluent in German.
I am fluent in German. No, but I was just given tons and tons of book assignments, and I am dyslexic. I don't like reading, so I do audiobooks and stuff. But for a lot of these books, like, they don't exist, so you just kind of have to push through. And it was the responsibility of the older church staff, of the people who've been around, to then I would have meetings with them, and I would be invited into like sermon planning meetings, and walk through scripture, basically taught through observing how it's done, how to properly exegete the Bible, which is kind of what you were talking about, exegesis versus eisegesis, reading yourself into the scripture instead of seeing scripture for what it is. And so I was able to have a lot of these questions early on in an intentional place where I was supposed to have these questions. So things like, hey man, like, I read this commentary about, the book of Revelations. What the heck's up with these dragons? And so, I don't know what's going on. Is this, he interpreted this as these 10 civilizations that have to happen before yada yada. And so I was given a place to have these discussions, because, like, I didn't go to seminary or anything where I would imagine you have a lot of these conversations. I don't know, I haven't gone. But I was lucky enough to be in a church where leadership was really intentional about bringing up the next generation without forsaking those scriptural truths you were talking about. And I don't think that you can bring on super young and unexperienced staff without having some type of plan on how to help them be formed,
That's good.
I think that's a really good example of stewardship too. Like those, the older staff, or I don't know if that was something the elders put in place or whatever, but like, that's a really good example of, hey, we're going to take a chance and hire young, but we're going to steward this moldable young person into somebody who is okay with asking questions and digging deep. And I think that's really cool, actually. It was
great.
Awesome.
Well, and the fun part was, like, because a lot of these older people, they were so set in their ways. And so, well, this is what I believe because this is what I've always believed. And so it was helpful for them too, because it forced them to rethink some of the things that they just kind of took for granted, which was really cool for me, because then as a young person, you feel like you're actually having a dialogue as opposed to just being lectured about, here's what you have to believe. You can go, but why do you think this? But what you're saying here doesn't quite line up with what you're saying over here. Can you explain to me how those two things can be congruent at the same time? And so it was helpful for all parties. Ideally in a healthy church body, you'd have these conversations, in small groups, and people would kind of all try and right the ship together, but practically, I don't think it always plays out like that. So it was really cool that I was given that at an early age.
For me, I think I got lucky with the professors I had in college. I went into my Bible college just wanting to do a general Bible study degree, and the day I was there to, like, schedule classes and figure it out, I met the guy who was the head of the youth ministry program at that school, and we kind of just connected. And so I switched my degree and did a bachelor's degree in student ministry, and I was kind of mentored by him, and he was very firm and harsh on this kind of theology foundation before you ever get into ministry. Like, and it was like the first time I had ever been challenged. Like, I would, you answer a question and it's like, well, why do you say that? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, and it's like the first time you're put
right.
to actually work out your theology. And so I think I just got really lucky with that. Like, I remember the first youth ministry class I ever had with him, and he just, kind of was, lecturing whatever. And he's just like, how are we, going to be put in full-time ministry positions, and most of this room has never read the Bible cover to cover? I was just like, dang, I've never read the Bible cover to cover. And so, like, that night I went home and, like, started to, like, go through the Bible and, like, Bible project and, like, study it. And, like, it was so important because it was like, that was his big thing, was like, before we get to, strategy, and we'll figure all that out. And
Methodology,
he was like, if you don't know like where you stand on these big things, and like you don't have a fleshed out worldview, like take your time, like don't rush in. And I was just like I've never heard that before. So I think I got lucky with that experience of like, I got hired young, but like it was like 2 years before getting hired, of like really being poured into by that guy one-on-one, and really being pushed in my theology to figure out, okay, what do I actually believe? And so that was really foundational for me. But I think it's a super important question, because we're different from general people listening or watching, because our world is church and ministry and things like that. But we've seen the examples of the other side of this, where you hire someone young and exciting and awesome, and then something happens and you realize, oh, their theology, their foundation, their anchor is not in the right place, right? And that's super dangerous, and we've seen the outcomes of that stuff.
Kind of falls apart.
Especially in church, where it's like, when somebody is placed in leadership above you, like it's like, okay, this person is, we're supposed to give them some type of respect and authority just because of their position that they're in. And so, which makes it dangerous for a younger person who thinks they might have all the answers, or at least pretend to have all the answers. They get asked a tough question, and then they just spew some nonsense that and then everybody around them is like, oh, well, okay, maybe he's right because he's in this position. So, and that just comes, that's leadership in a nutshell, regardless, not even in ministry. Just, I guess, being willing to say, as a young person, I don't know, let me look that up for you, or let me ask somebody. Those are awesome words to hear from somebody young, especially somebody young in ministry. Yeah,
definitely.
Because I've been there, like we've all been there, especially in the funniest thing about doing, and on the other side of this coin, is when somebody asks you a question when you're young in ministry, and you tell them, well, I'm doing this because you guys have been doing it this way for so long, so we're just going to start doing it this way. They hired me on to change things, which is also dangerous. But I've been in that position. I'm sure you guys have too. But it's a good discussion. Like I think that people hearing us talk about it, it's funny because for me, like I'm the oldest of us three, but there's so many times at Sycamore Creek here where I am still the youngest person in the room, and just because of our demographic, and but it's not always been that way lately, which is cool because we're getting a little younger as a church, which is just another reason for us to keep hiring younger, which is why we have such an awesome leadership team as Steve and the elders, in their vision to hire younger and to keep us younger. So
with the balance, with the older, which is awesome. But
because I got to the point, and this is, with Josiah at the table, and you guys know the whole story, but I got to the point after 10 years of doing the same thing as a worship pastor that I was just like, I don't think I have anything else to bring to the table unless you guys want me to keep doing it the same way for the next 10 years. That's fine, but we're not going to get anywhere. So let's bring in somebody, even if he's only 5 years younger than me, let's bring in somebody who does have the energy and other ideas to stir up the pot, make it fresh again. And so I think that we had LCN, our pastors group that meets on Tuesdays once a month, and there's a guy in there who would be an awesome part of this conversation, but he was basically saying he's been in full-time ministry for a long time, lead pastor of a church in Gehanna, and he was like, it's time for me to take a step back and hire somebody younger, but I would love to be a part of it because he was basically kind of, I think he might have even started the church, but he's like, I don't want to be left out of it. I want to be a part of it, but I want to be able to help coach and teach the next person that gets brought in. He would be a great person to talk to about this probably, but
maybe we'll do a part 2 and ask him to come. I think he would, but I mean, like, I know that's the self-awareness of when it is time to pass it on, and the mindset of constantly raising people up to step into those positions, I think, is so important. Like, I know Steve says all the time, like, he knows it'll be time when he's holding back the church, when he's at a point where he's older and is holding back the vision of the church and the mission of the church.
I like how you did that. That was good. When he's old.
Older.
But like he says that a lot, and I think that's a super important mindset to have because there's some people that just want to white knuckle it and hold on for as long as they can, and at some point it is time to step out and hand things over to younger people, and I think that can be hard for some people. But
I think it's easy for you to say and for us to say because we are younger.
Sure.
Or do you think
so.
we'll get to the point someday where it's just as difficult to release the baton?
Yeah, I can't imagine it's easy by any means.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I mean I even worried about it coming on here just because like the ministry that you handed over to me was your baby. Like you made it what it is, right? And some people have a real difficulty of letting go of the things that they created. But on the flip side of that, and I think the perspective that you have is somebody did it for you at some point.
Yeah.
And who are you to be the last person to ever touch something, right? You need to. And I'm saying this, like you said, as a young person. It could be very, very difficult in however many years to do it myself. But I think that needs to always be in the back of our minds is just at some point somebody took a chance on me and I need to take a chance on somebody else. At some point somebody handed something established over to me and said, run with it, dude.
Yeah.
And you've got to do that to somebody else. Otherwise that's how things die.
I think for both me and Mitch, the person that gave us that opportunity was the same person, was Steve. Because I don't know what Steve was thinking because he was only on staff here for 10 months when he hired me when I had just turned 21, just got married, and it's pretty gutsy decision because he's still kind of proving himself here 11, 12 years ago, and then he does that, and then I guess maybe 8, 9 years later he does the same thing again with you, Mitch. And so what about who was that for you? Who was it that gave you was that your dad or
so my ministry story is when I was 19. I'd been serving on worship teams in some volunteer leader capacity since I was 16. So 3 years of that, and then in college I was asked to be an intern in the worship department, both by my dad and the then worship director who had been there for 25 years. And it was a year-long paid internship, and I was working at the UPS store. I was like, anything, please. Yes, this sounds great. And so I took a year, book reports, intentional conversations, just to kind of learn what ministry even is like. And I didn't even know if I felt called to ministry. I just knew I hated my job and I enjoyed Sunday mornings. So if we can do more of this, that would be great. And then, when the ministry was over, when the internship was over, for all of the year-long internships that they offered, they helped you craft your resume and kind of talk about next steps and if they needed to give recommendation letters or whatever that looks like. And with me, the lady that I learned from, her name was Linda Doran. She's passed since, but she was very much I don't want to let this kid go. He's got something, and I think we can really cultivate it. So she was the one kind of advocating for me. So then I came on as an associate worship role. And then we had an interesting thing where her and I actually flipped roles, and she became my associate. And it could have been this could have been really weird and awkward. It could have been super weird and awkward for her and I, but she was great, and it worked out really, really well. So my dad and this lady named Linda kind of took a chance. And look, man, I'm sure if I went back in time and I looked at some of the things that I was doing, knowing the things that I know now, I'd probably be super cringed out by a lot of decisions that I made.
It's part of the process, though.
It's part of the process, right? You have to. And that's something to keep in mind for future leaders and for people handing over leadership is it's part of the process.
Yeah. Do you feel pressure, but you both can answer this, but in your still young ministry age, do you feel pressured to give somebody that shot already? I think it might be easier for you, Mitch, because you can give students opportunities, snap your fingers and give them opportunities, and take a shot with somebody in all of their immaturity, and it's a little bit easier because you can easily take it back, right? Do you feel that obligation to give people shots because young people, just because you were given that opportunity?
Yeah, I feel like I am trying to after my first year and a half was like, all right, we're changing systems, we're redoing things, we're really trying to push everything forward, and now I feel like I'm in a place where I'm like, okay, things are healthy, things are going, things are consistent, and so I've been trying to find more of those ways to let people lead because I'm constantly, being 24, I'm still not that far removed from being in high school and being their age, and I'm constantly thinking in situations like, what do I wish somebody did for me when I was their age? So like I've let students preach on a Sunday night in the middle of our series, and students who are interested in ministry and have those things going, I'll be like, hey, do you want to preach in a couple weeks and help them write a message, and we're doing student we call them fight clubs, but these really small groups now, and I'm giving students opportunities to lead in those times, and so I'm trying to now the more consistent I've been with just like week to week, I know that things are going to go kind of happen like this, so now I have more energy to put into like, all right, let's push them, let's give them opportunities. Like we have a student leadership team that Lexi and I give a lot of our time to, and I'm always trying to think of like, hey, who wants to plan the game this week? Who wants to do this? Like, you want to do announcements? Like, you're gonna get up on stage, and just trying to, because I didn't get a ton of real hands-on ministry experience when I was in high school. When I was finally like, okay, I can't run from this anymore, I'm gonna go into ministry, was relatively late in high school. And sometimes I think like, man, what would have been like if somebody would have given me more opportunity in high school to fail and mess up and try things. Like I feel like I would have been maybe further ahead in realizing my calling sooner. So
Sure.
I'm trying to do that more, in just in little ways too, of like we'll have a new student walk in and I'll go up to another guy and be like, hey, that's so and so, go meet him and talk to him.
Yeah.
And just kind of like giving him things to try and opportunities to mess up, and like you said, it's easy to take it away, and it's not like long-term commitments most of the time, but yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but
It makes total sense. Yeah, for me, I'm always looking for the next person to kind of pour into and try and give over some responsibility to. That's why it's one of my ulterior motives in taking such an interest in youth worship team, is because somebody did it to me, and it meant a lot to me then. And so if I can be that person for whoever's next, then great.
Yeah.
And I've been very fortunate. I've had the privilege of pouring into, I think, 3 people who have gone into either part-time or full-time ministry directly out of like my volunteer team, which is so awesome. And to then be able to, shoot texts at night when they've got questions and they're like, hey, like, I don't know how to handle this, what do I do, is awesome. Because that was my dad for me growing up, is like, hey, I have no clue how I'm supposed to handle this person. Can you tell me what I'm supposed to do? So yeah, I care about that like crazy. It is a little more, when you're on such a public platform like the stage on a Sunday morning, there's a little more higher stakes than maybe youth group.
Sure.
So I have to be a little bit more protective of that, but I'm constantly looking for it, because it's also so easy on Sunday mornings on the stage to have it feel like the Josiah show in terms of the worship, and I hate that. I don't want that at all. I don't want people coming to Sycamore because Josiah is on worship this morning or whatever, and so my default is then if I can also give some of that over, then that'll curb some of that as well, and make it more of a healthy worship environment.
Yeah. It makes me think of our intern last summer. Shout out Michael Pleasant. He came in just looking for an internship in ministry, and was very upfront when we met him and interviewed and everything. He was like, I don't think I want to do youth ministry. Like I kind of just want a full-time youth church ministry experience and internship. And so we were like, hey, let's go, you're talented, you're good. And coming out of our summer, right now he's a full-time youth pastor in Atlanta, Georgia, loving every second of it, and he'll send me texts, and it's just cool. Like, it's like,
that's awesome.
We gave him a lot of our time and effort and energy, and it was, it's like, it's worth it, like he invests into them, and it's just super cool to see. But I'm maybe not in an internship level, but constantly trying to think about, just like you said, people that you can, kind of give them those opportunities, even if it feels small, like, hey, just go do this for a high schooler or for, whoever. That means the world, to be young and be like, oh, I have trust. Like, I can go try this. And if I mess up, they're not going to, berate me. Like,
Exactly.
it's okay. And I think that's super, super valuable. So
It's funny when you look at your life, like look past and you look at all the people that gave you opportunities in life and you're like, what the heck were they thinking by doing that? Like, I can think of a bunch of them, but I don't mean to like make this a bunch of questions that I'm asking you guys
they're
today,
good.
but to kind of maybe to close it out, I don't know if it will or not, but along these lines, do you think that leadership, like specifically church leadership, maybe not specifically church leadership, but do you think leadership is something that is and can be cultivated in people that don't see it yet? Or is it something that, is an intrinsic thing that they just have?
Nurture.
Because when I listen to you guys talk and looking back at my life and thinking about all the opportunities that I've been given, would I be where I am right now without those opportunities?
Right.
Would I have been able to just grab them and seize those moments without the opportunities? How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to leadership, everybody has a certain amount, maybe intrinsically. Some people may have more intrinsically than others, but I think ultimately it's cultivated. I mean, the best leaders, certainly church leaders, but leaders in general that I've met, even at their, pastoring churches of thousands, they're still going to leadership conferences to try and learn. So there's got to be something about cultivating it and growing in it. But then again, I've met those high school kids where you're just like, gosh, this kid's got so much potential, So I think it's probably both but I think certainly you can't get there without some level of training and cultivation and bringing it to the forefront and kind of shaping it, because I think even those I've also seen it the other way around, where you see a high school kid and you're like, wow, they've got such potential, and then you check in 5 years later and you're like, whoa, what happened? So yeah, it's got to be both right?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's kind of the same as creativity, right? So there's some people that just naturally are gifted in the realm of creativity, right? And I think the same thing is true with leadership. There are, for me, I know we're talking about students a lot, but like there are students that I'll meet or walk into a room and I'm like, they have so much potential to be a leader. And, hopefully we have an opportunity to steward that in the right direction, because generally speaking, like the students that have a lot of leadership, just natural potential, sometimes they can be the ones that are very disruptive and very, just because they're loud and they know that they can lead, and it just needs to be stewarded to, something positive. So I think sometimes, like you're naturally good with people, good with crowds, no fear, whatever. And you're like, man, that person was born with these talents and these abilities. But also, I mean, there's so many different types of leaders too. So I mean, there's bosses of huge organizations that we wouldn't believe the amount that goes on in what they do, and they're very quiet and calm and caring and detail oriented, and you're like, man, that's so different from the type of leader that I'm used to. So I think leader is such a broad term in general, but I think like the type of obvious leaders, maybe that is more natural and they're kind of just born with that. But I think everybody can be, stewarded and taught, how to be a leader and how to lead, and their influence and their skills and their abilities and their personality types and all those kinds of things. And I think it generally does take somebody older calling it out of them, though. Those students that maybe you referenced of like, man, they've got so much potential, and then 5 years down the road, you're like, man, I mean, maybe it's there wasn't somebody saying, hey, you're a really good leader, or you're really awesome, you've got these these skills and these things you could do. So I think there is, that there's a responsibility on people older leading down too, and looking out for those people that maybe nobody else is looking out for, or the people that are quieter, and calling things out of them too. I think that's super important. So I do think it's both. I think some people are just born with it, maybe the obvious type of leadership, but I think leadership can be taught and caught and stored and molded, and just like really anything else, I think it's a habit, it's a mindset, it's something that you can build. So
I think there's also, so it's funny when you talk about CEOs, one of the, there's a personality test called Strength Finders, and it's based on Gallup polls. They made it, And basically, it says that the top 1% of the top 1% of CEOs and business owners and stuff, they all don't focus on fixing their weaknesses. They just play towards their strengths, and then they hire to fix those weaknesses.
Yep.
So there are CEOs who are not people at all. They don't know how to talk to employees or whatever, and they stumbled their way through it until they could hire somebody to do HR for them.
Yep.
And then they just focus on.
But they're geniuses in whatever they do.
That is also a leadership characteristic, because one of the things that I was taught pretty early on in ministry is everybody has a leadership cap. Everybody at some point you'll cap it out, and so there are ways that you can go about raising that cap, and then there's ways that you can go about sidestepping the cap. So I went to a church, and my dad was on staff at a church in Tennessee. It was a huge church, like 16,000 people or something crazy like that. And the senior pastor there realized early on that he had his cap. And so he knew where his cap was coming into play, and it wasn't the preaching side of things, it was the behind the scenes side of things. So he hired out his XP to do those things so he could just pour into that, and it wound up raising his cap. And so in the same way, you know, I'm constantly aware, like, I've got a cap for worship leading. At some point I'm gonna hit it, and I hope it's not for a long time. But when I do hit it, what do I do? You know, and that's where I think the other side of leadership is so important, is creating the team, cultivating the people around you who will help you lead better and be better, which I think is what Steve's been doing here on staff since he hired you. And I think is the key to success when it comes to, I mean, business or church or whatever.
I mean, this applies to lots of different arenas. I mean, we're talking specifically because our experience ministry wise, but I kind of started with that too. Like, this can apply to really wherever you are and whatever you do. So a lot of these principles of either leading down, being older and being willing to take a chance, but stored and like, you know, put things in place that help them, you know, maybe barriers that help them fail, but fail well. And then also leading up and being humble and being willing to push, but, you know, respecting tradition and respecting and honoring the people above you and have gone before you. So I think we've actually kind of had a really good conversation of both those directions, and hopefully, you know, no matter what you do for a living or where you are, you know, there's stuff that you can take from this conversation. Maybe you're in a position where you are the boss, or you are above other people working for you, and or you know, maybe even a parent leading down to your, you know, your kids, and it's like, you know, what can you do to lead down and encourage them and, you know, raise them up and call things out of them that they didn't even know they had. Or maybe you're younger like us and you're in a position where there's people above you, or you have a boss you don't love, or so that's our experience, but but maybe that's your experience. And you know, what do you do in that position, and how can you still lead well and honor them, respect them, but also, you know, innovate and do things different. So yeah, I think this was really good. Any other closing thoughts or anything you guys want to add to this as we call it a day?
Jared?
I've got a lot more thoughts, but I don't want to keep it going for very much longer. So I'll pass for now. We'll pick it up next week.
Yeah, maybe
actually, no, next week.
Next week it's just me and Mitch.
Yeah.
What are we going to talk about?
I don't know.
We can talk about Jared.
Yeah, we will.
Y'all need to
stay tuned.
Bring in somebody.
See you next week.
Like and subscribe.
All right. Well, I think that's all we got for today. We would love to hear your thoughts. Let us know what you thought of this conversation and what you want to hear in future conversations. And we will be back next week on another episode of the In All Things podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the In All Things podcast. Our challenge for you today is to send this episode to one person. Seriously, think of somebody right now that could use this conversation and send it to them. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic ideas, please send them to podcast@sycamorecreek.org, and make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Sycamore Creek Church so that you can always see what's going on in our world. If this conversation helped you at all, make sure you share it, leave a review, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on a single episode. We love you, God loves you, and we'll see you next week on the In All Things podcast.